I mean, what did you want? Obviously, this is for podcast interview, so we can cover the obvious stuff. I think, Chris. I don't know if you've got anything, but I mean, what's the club's kind of I guess improved communication would be the obvious thing to say, Mark. What's the club's intentions with this? I mean, how do you see it? What's its role? I mean, the trust and the supporters club are elements in it, but it's kind of like doing stuff that I would have thought the supporters club might have been the more obvious choice to be in the conversation, or am I misreading what it's for?
No, no, it's a good question, and it's one that and obviously Nick, you'll know this from previously. It was one that we were looking at obviously a couple of years ago as a really important tool to discuss matters with a wider supporter base than just the supporters club. Obviously, they will be a key part of the fan advisory board, but I think
Mm,
it's very much. Yeah, it's. I think we're using it very much as a kind of structured consultation and dialogue with a group, obviously, of, I suppose, quite diverse, different fans from different backgrounds who all represent different viewpoints, but also so that we can talk through some of the more strategic level decisions that we're obviously toying with at the club. But also, so from one point, obviously, the value that we get out of it as a club perspective is getting valuable insight and sounding on various matters, but also being able to put problems that we deal with in a very different way. We deal with it on one side of the fence, thinking, well, what do we think is good for fans? What do we think is good for the club? But actually, it's very difficult when you're looking at it, perhaps with different information. It's
mm.
you can end up making mistakes. So what we hope is this is a chance for us to go. It's a formal channel to talk about strategic matters. Obviously, longer term, this will become a requirement as part of the football licensing process. And it's one that I really don't want it to be a box tick exercise by the club to do something that we have to do because it's the rules. I'd rather we got value out of it as a club and the board got value out of it and fans got value out of it. I think when the rules come in the next 2, 3 seasons with as part of the licensing, if you have got clubs who at that point have to create a fan advisory board, I just think that's pointless. I think that's going to achieve nothing other than to tick a box. And what I don't want is us to really just do something just to pay lip service to it. I would rather get some value out of it. I think where there is quite a distinct difference between what a supporters club does and a fan advisory board. Obviously, a supporters club is more operational matters, matters that affect fans specifically, looking at a membership based, I suppose, lobbying group, but also they will put various matters to us. I think for the fan advisory board, this is talking about wider points. So you would have, obviously, from some of the points we discussed last week, it was very much things that are probably even could be 1 or 2 years away from being discussed as a fan matter, but things like looking at how we would split the North Stand if there was a business case for it. It may be that we never get there, and maybe we do it plan B, C, D. But actually, if we start talking through ideas, it's a good sounding board to go, there's a lot of work that needs to be done here before we want to present it as something that we want to kind of say, this is an idea that we've gone through, we've actually, it's reasoned, so that we can now have it critiqued. Whereas when it is just a concept, that's where I think having a more strategic view and also explaining the reasons why. So sometimes we'll be talking about a matter from a club perspective, and we also, as part of the fan advisory board, we gave a brief overview of last year's financial statements that will be released probably towards the end of December, and we'll want to get those out as quickly as we can. But we roughly, obviously, while they're still subject to audit, just putting out there, this is roughly where we are. This is part of the wider plan. And again, it's one that I will happily talk through, probably a bit too much to everyone and say, this is our strategy, this is our plan. But you can go in a lot more detail around these are the nuts and bolts and the mechanics of why we're doing certain things. And the challenge that we've got as a business that has solidly lost money now for the last 30 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm all in favour of this as a concept. I mean, I think probably the main thing that struck me, I don't know about Chris, but certainly I think from what you might call the average Millwall fan's perspective, I think it's going to be the communication with people. It's going to be the most crucial thing because I know this is the link to the minutes has gone out on X this afternoon, and it's on the website and all that kind of thing. But the problem endlessly with Millwall particularly is that most people never hear of it and don't know about it. So it's keeping it in the forefront of people's attention. It's going to be the main. 'Cause I think reading through the minutes, it seems like great stuff, informational stuff, but it's keeping it in front of people that's going to be the main problem. It strikes me anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, I think I totally agree. Obviously, Steve is a member of the FAB, and I think
Mm,
Steve and I have talked extensively about, look, how do we make sure that we do keep this differential? I mean, him and I sort of talked through how can we link it back to people's everyday lives.
yeah.
And actually, we sort of sat and said, look, if you think about business and work, there are unions, there are HR teams, there are team meetings, and actually all of those coexist for different reasons, but have got a very strong purpose. And I think Tuesday night is a great example of, not to get into the detail of the police incident,
Mm,
that for me is 100% MSC. I was there, actually saw it, witnessed it. I was about bloody 10 rows behind it.
right.
But that's for me to input to Steve as a fan and not part of the FAB.
Mm,
So I think those are great examples of that sort of day-to-day match day issues. For me, are definitely MSC, not FAB. And we sort of talked at our first meeting about, look, what does success look like? And I think one of the reasons we wanted to do this is I think we totally recognise the communication is key, but success could be, and not saying you did, Mark, because it was super collaborative, but the club might come up with 19 ideas that the FAB feedback are ridiculous, that never actually hit a wider forum, and that's actually success. So I think it's making sure somehow we can bridge that gap. And to be honest, it's the feedback we need of, is it too little information? Is it too much? We want to keep sort of the confidentiality with the club, but ultimately we are finding our feet in that piece. So one of the reasons we suggested doing this was exactly that. How do we make sure we filter the information to people in the right format, but not sort of breaking the confidence of Mark and the wider club?
Just to add to that, I think one of the other challenges, dare I say, on top of communication, and of course, I know with the selection of various members on Fan on the Board, we've tried to cover people of all different backgrounds and experiences, but inevitably you won't, because it's bleeding impossible to do that. So how do you ensure that, and maybe this is where as podcast we can help as well, by the way, I guess it's an open-ended question, but how do you ensure that you do cover the breadth of that? Because if, for example, there are certain things that just never make their way, then almost the communication doesn't matter because we're not reaching a good cross-section of Millwall fans.
So I think for me, I think it's conversations like this. So absolutely, I think us as a team, we want to ensure we've got that voice of everyone, and that means getting out and about on our match days and talking to people. We've set up email addresses, and we actually toyed with is that a good idea? Is that a bad idea? Because would a supporter know, am I emailing the FAB or emailing the supporters club? I think ultimately it's for us to filter that if we feel actually that question isn't for us to feedback. So I think it's about communication, it's about listening, it's about doing this sort of thing and making sure that we've got a very tight relationship with Steve and the wider Millwall Supporters Club to make sure those more, let's say, strategic points are filtered up, probably in both channels, but with two different voices. It's a great, and my background has been logistics for years, and for years we struggled with, like, how do we actually communicate with 6,000 drivers that are on the road, don't want to read emails, don't really want to read minutes. And
mm,
ultimately that was about me getting out and about, the team getting out and about into the depots, talking to drivers, doing short, sharp updates off the back of a set of meeting minutes. And to me, that sort of verbal communication in today's world is still super important, because that's how we get the engagement.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Stu. I mean, just as you're speaking, I'm just thinking to myself, even on this call, here we are, fan advisory board, an important thing. There's Chris and me. On the other ones involving the players and the glam side of the game, we've got four of us, and there's questions and there's an energy to it, and I think that is as you've just described. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. You're trying to talk to 6,000 lorry drivers or drivers of whatever they are. Similarly, most people just want to go to football and they want to have an enjoyable day. They don't really want to get involved in, or to some level, hear about the ins and outs of what this kind of thing is. So it's going to be difficult, because it's got to be, you've got to reach people that maybe don't want to be heard. But I don't particularly have a solution for that. But it's easy to identify as a problem, isn't it?
No, it is, and I think, and what's interesting, I think everyone, and in the process, and I think Mark and I and Max, we talked about this a lot, which is actually the club is so unique in the heritage. When I use the word authenticity, like no matter Mark says we're getting ready for the Premier League, but I think almost if we had a little bit of a mission statement, sounds very corporate, we won't do it, but a bit of a mission statement for
A
the
Millwall mission statement.
well, but it is. It's like, how do we make sure that that authenticity
Yeah.
comes across? And I think, like, in the first meeting, it did really dawn on me. I think sometimes as supporters, we always think Mark and Max are Millwall supporters, right? They're not. They're
So I've heard. So I've heard.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's it. Sort of hit me that actually the heritage of the club is so important to its DNA. And Mark's on the call. It was a fantastic first meeting because Mark was super transparent, probably more transparent than I think we thought. It was super engaging, but it really allowed us to have that authenticity and talk about the heritage and make sure, I suppose, what we've all grown up with the club
Mm.
is at the heart of those conversations.
Can I dig a little bit deeper into that then? So, and this might be a little bit too specific for this call, but sod it, I'll ask it anyway. At the end of the day, we know that we need to constantly evolve the club in order to get to that mission statement or whatever we want to coin it. We do want to reach the Premier League one day. I think we all know that there is the direction of travel. In order to do that, quite frankly, we need to be making as much money as we can as a football club, right? So you've kind of got that is a requirement in order to be successful and to bring better players in, blah, 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 blah. How do you balance doing that? And I'm talking about the match day experience and, corporate hospitality and all of the stuff that goes with it, but keeping that authenticity and DNA that doesn't alienate the core group of fans that, being honest, they don't want a pizza. They don't want a food cart on a Saturday that allows them to get a pizza. They just want to turn up, have a pint. And do you know what I mean? Like, you've got to try and satisfy new audiences that will grow the revenue of the football club, but also make sure that the bread and butter of this club, which will always be there, is not alienated. And that's a tough thing to do. So I don't envy you, but how are you going to do it?
But it's a tough thing, but it's also one that you actually learn from others who do it well, but you learn a lot more from those that do it really badly. And there's those clubs that, and look, I've worked at a club and we sold our soul very quickly. And it was a club I'd supported as a kid. So I had a very different viewpoint, probably similar to what you're talking about here. And you go, hold on, this is important. This is important. When you just pay lip service to it, this generation of players will be forgotten by people in 6 years' time. You've got to have a nod back to the past. But that was easier at a club that had nothing other than heritage from before my parents were born. So when you hark back to winning trophies in the 1800s or in the 50s, it's a little bit easier because everything is nailed onto that kind of past. However, where you see you make mistakes is where you learn from it. And like you were saying there, obviously, we all spend far too much time on X reading feedback, and you see pizzas is a great one, and seeing people going, woke nonsense, having a pizza. But people are buying pizzas.
Well, that's right.
So we've got to cater for those people who want a pizza on a match day, because actually they might not like pie and chips. They might like one of the other offerings we've got, but we need to make sure that we still have the core products that people buy week in, week out. We need to make sure the beer is good. The beer has to be good and it has to be better. It has to be the right beer in the right places. But we need to increase the choice and range, because not everybody wants what we've done for 30 years, but what we've done for 30 years that we know works, we've got to keep doing. And I think it's like anything, when we are successful on the pitch, if that's in a year's time, 3 years' time, 5 years' time, I think we want to do it our way. We want to do it a way that will probably be quite disruptive in and amongst our what could be a new peer group. And you see, obviously, there's some very faceless corporations that sit within that 20 group. I think we'll bring something different, and I think it will be one that gets people raising their eyebrows. And to be honest, I want them to, because look, I think we just said the point. I didn't grow up around here. I grew up somewhere else. When I went to football as a kid, and when I went to rugby, it was a very different experience to today. Last couple of times I've been, you do feel like you're a customer. It's like, well, no, you're supposed to be a supporter. You're supposed to be a fan. It's not like a production line. You're not popping into John Lewis. It's like there is more emotion involved in that. So for us, it's never losing sight of that, because I think what we've got, which is very unique to us, we've got a board of different range, different experience, but have had that longevity with us, understand the nuances of us as a club, and won't let us forget that. And when we do, in the past, obviously before this, as a forum, when we've been making decisions, I will spend time with different members of the board to go through and canvass opinions to go, will this work? Because I'm thinking is trying to put my football fan head on, going, that's what I would want, but is that what will work for us? And actually, it's taking that step back and going, we should be fan first in most of our decisions. It should be thinking that, not thinking we're a business, think about our customers. It's like that. That term really doesn't resonate well with me. And I think I'm hoping that will come across. We will make mistakes, we will get it wrong, but that's where forums such as the Supporters Club or the Fan Advisory Board, if we're not doing it right, will hold us to account. And that's where the real value is making sure that we are always thinking fan first in those key decisions.
I was really struck. I don't know which one it was, Mark, but it was either the Doherty's Bar or the new restaurant. I can't remember the name. The 1885 club, but it was someone posted that it was sold out to the end of the season, which really struck me. And I thought, wow, I wouldn't have expected that at Millwall, because for the very reasons we're talking about, you think of it as a certain type of club, and yet it seems to me that there is a demand for some decent food, decent drink. On the same point, I sat next to an American guy a couple of games back, and he bought the saddest looking plate of chips I've ever seen in my life from the downstairs West Upper bar area. I said, blimey, mate, he must have been starved to eat these chips, but I mean, so I think if there was decent stuff there, and I've had a pucker pie there myself, it's all right, but I look at the stuff that's on offer outside. I just wonder whether that can be somehow moved inside, because I think there is a demand for decent stuff. I don't entirely buy this because it's Millwall. It's got to be, Coldblow Lane 1975 still. Is it? We can keep some of the past and have a decent pizza. I don't mind a pizza personally. I'm all for a decent pizza.
Nick, I think I've had the pleasure of going into the bar that you're referring to, and I think when you look at the beer, it is night and day to what you get in the kiosk, during the game.
Yeah.
I think that's something. And this is just me, right? I'm survey of one, but for me, I have to say that the beer is I'll use my words diplomatically, could be improved in those areas.
We know, and we're working on, and obviously we moved a couple of years ago from Carlsberg to Shepherd Neame, obviously putting Spitfire in, which is, I think most people, and we've seen feedback, is a significant improvement, but that doesn't mean that we rest there. Part of the issue, and I think we again, it's one that be very open to the challenge, is that kiosk is used 25, 26 times a year. To refit it could be hundreds of thousands of pounds cost, if not more, obviously in terms of putting in additional beer and the potential issues with that. We've started to make changes in certain areas, but it can't be done overnight. It needs to be data-led in terms of where it will work. It can't go in every single bar. If it could, it'd be great, but we are constrained by some pretty dated facilities in places. We need to get those more modern first, and that's part of a wider plan that we're working on internally as kind of modernisation of facilities, because it's not just what you see in terms of beer taps in the wrong place at the front, it should be at the back, moving those, but it's like, well, that's where the cellars are, where it's what the piping is, it's also where the services are. And somebody designed this place in the late 80s based on how people behaved. That's not how it works these days. So a lot of it, you go, we could just put in new taps, have 3 or 4 different beers in that area, but it actually doesn't work as a feasible solution until we change all the back office. But then bringing it back to the fan advisory board, this is where we can then talk through the challenges and also the solutions that we will put in place, because you talk a little bit earlier around there is a need for us to obviously grow revenues, which is obviously part of our kind of wider strategy around growing the business. If we can get more choice, which means fans will actually go, I will get some food at the den, I will get a drink. I mean, if only we didn't have to serve beer in a plastic pint glass. I think psychologically that always makes it feel worse. Even if you are serving the same beer chilled to the same temperature, when you've got it in a plastic glass, it's not the same experience. But we know the rules about that. We know the rules about you can't see the pitch with a pint glass, which is crazy. And I mean, it's frankly pathetic as a rule, but it's the world we live in. But we push and we don't accept that we can never change that. There's a groundswell around that, and actually it doesn't make a difference. It's not going to affect people's behaviour. In fact, it probably will make an improvement, because people aren't going to be caning 5 pints at 20 to 3 to get out onto the into the seats. You'd hope it's a bit more of a enjoyable experience. But there's those things that we will get onto. But with the fan advisory board, that's where we can start to discuss through those plans. But also that's where we can get that acid test from fans to go, is this going to work? Not just from fans, but from people who are very successful in their own careers, who can then talk through and share their own experiences to actually give us a challenge and give us that, I suppose, critical friend in terms of anything we want to put through to see whether it is going to work or not.
I think it's a great example. So Rosalind Rowe, the vice chair of the FAB, and you'll see it in the minutes. Her career and her background is built on almost this sort of fan journey type background. So having a strategic view, and Chris, you laugh about the pizza because I said exactly the same. And then I take my two girls, 11 and 13. They love the bloody pizza, right? And all of a sudden I'm thinking, I want to put them a pint, but there. And I think it's a great example of that sort of at a higher level. We get the MSC information because I think that is absolutely feedback, complementing that with some of the experience that Road brings and formalising it. We talked about personas and making sure everyone's. I think that for me is a great example where the two can complement each other. And for me, and I've got a really good friend that I met through Millwall, wasn't a Millwall supporter. He actually bizarrely was a depot manager for the DHL building next to the ground, used to work Saturday mornings, turn up, and he's now comes week in, week out because he just loves the atmosphere and has fallen in love with the club. And I think that's where this balance of making sure we have got 1885 and no 11 and Doherty's, but appealing to that authenticity of people that turn up and just love what they see, right? Fall in love with the club and the atmosphere.
We're easy to fall in love with, Stu, aren't we, mate? That's always been so. I'm looking through the minutes. I don't know how much you want to dwell on this stuff, but I'm really intrigued by the item 2, the reduced attendance at midweek games, which is something I think that we've all probably dwelt on over time, and it's an interesting subject. I don't have any pat answers, but I think everyone notices how much less there are people attending these midweek games, and everyone will only ever speak from their own experience. And some things I think will be within the club's purview and others not. But I've seen suggestions, and you see it in the European games, they have earlier kickoffs. Do the club, or would the club within the EFL channels push for such things, or would that be a thing that might be something you'd consider? Earlier kickoff times, like you get in the Europa games, for example.
It's a difficult one because we are fairly constrained by the EFL rules, but it's an interesting one. We the last midweek game, Coventry, we had Trevor Birch there from the EFL, and obviously we had. If you look at attendance, tickets sold, is really strong. If you look at no-shows, and obviously we start analysing the reasons for that, and part of what we discussed in the FAB was what we do on that, and we'll get onto that in a second. But Trevor was saying that it is a challenge. It's a huge challenge because midweek games across the EFL are more challenging for attendance. In the Premier League, they're more challenging. However, in the Premier League, they're 100% capacity, so they have more mechanisms to play with than most of us in the Championship, and certainly in League One, League Two, where you've got capacity still to sell. It's more challenging for obviously away fans travel, and we saw that obviously with Birmingham. It's one train, maybe two trains post-match to get back to London is not ideal because it means you've got to find alternative routes of transport. But we also know, and it's one of the things that we're going to discuss more with the fan advisory board, and there's a working group at the club looking at this. But if you're a season ticket holder living, say where I am, down in the bottom of Kent, I mean, I'll obviously be up all day anyway because I'll be here working. But if you're working in Tunbridge Wells and then it's an hour and a half drive up or a train up, which obviously is going to be an intermittent train service home afterwards, and you're competing against Sky Football Plus or other ways of watching the games, we'll leave it there. But you're competing with, and also the product that Sky have put on in terms of 4 cameras, commentary is a lot better than it used to be. So all of a sudden, if you do live, and we've obviously got season ticket holders. When I lived over in Worcestershire and obviously back home in Warwickshire, you've got season ticket holders who live there. If you're travelling in from Malvern, I mean, it used to take me 4 hours to get here from there. But you're not going to come if you're working on a midweek game, especially if you can then watch it and it's a decent enough show on Sky or however you're watching it. But one of the things we want to do is obviously talk about different ideas. We will have ideas that we've looked at and we'll see what other clubs do and talk to other clubs to get feedback and go, does this work? Do these sorts of incentives work? But then working with the fan advisory board to go, how do we make it compelling that people can come in? Is it a different type of offering? Is it, like you said, is there lobbying that we can do with the EFL to change kickoff times? Europe, it's a lot easier, but unfortunately, like all these things, it's largely driven by broadcast, and they'll try and have obviously a 6 p.m. kickoff, an 8 p.m. kickoff, obviously thinking about European times as well for broadcast. So it is challenging, but I think what I've said, and again, hopefully what will come across clearly is, even though it's challenging, that doesn't mean that we do nothing. Let's keep looking at ways. And if there's something that we can do that makes it easier for people, that offers, if it doesn't work, we try something else. But let's keep trying ideas, because just to accept it as being, like we were told from the EFL, all clubs suffer. It's like, well, that doesn't mean that we can't try things, because actually we should be challenging that. We should be challenging everything that we do, because it should never be taken as granted.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And Nick, I think we had a long discussion about, I'm so sorry, my next door neighbour is cutting his grass right outside the windows. I don't know if you can hear the background noise.
I just had the cack trying to get in, Stu.
You can't make it up, like, always cutting the grass in the pouring down rain. But I mean, 2 points to that. One, I mean, Chris, I couldn't see a spare seat in Birmingham on Tuesday night. And I sat there and thought, actually, yes, it's Tuesday night, it was pouring with rain. Actually, I've reached out to almost the sort of central group that coordinate the FABs. Just say, look, is there someone at Birmingham I can talk to? Look, what were they doing on Tuesday night that meant that ground was sold out? And putting sort of my business hat on, from a club's perspective, sort of have empathy with upgrading tickets or giving tickets away. Like, I made the suggestion of, look, I've got 2 kids' season tickets. It's just late for them, and therefore it's difficult for them to attend because of school. But I could probably pay 20 quid and bring a mate along with me, or 10 quid. But then you put your club's hat on, and it's, well, if that person was coming anyway and would have bought a ticket, commercially that doesn't make much sense. So I think, again, strategically, us sort of helping the club with some data, analysing the data, looking at it at a sort of higher level, I think is where we can sit in a room in a nice way, challenge. But I mean, Mark and I had a really interesting conversation about EBIT and EBITDA and the longevity of the club. And actually, that was a really insightful conversation driven by data. that really helped us walk out the room with a bit more of an understanding. So I think that's where the FAB hopefully can bridge this gap between the two.
Yeah. I've got two more questions. By the way, another thing that we can learn from Birmingham is in the concourse area, they had the likes of Cruz Campo and Moretti on tap. Just saying. Anyway, we move on. Not that I'm a beer addict or anything. So I guess two questions. I want to come back to the EBITDA piece in a moment, but I guess my next question is more around the FAB's role in, and if there is one, don't know, are in on the field matters. So for a lot of what we've spoken about is off the field, right? And I understand that, but is there a role to play in on the field? And of course, I'm not saying they do Alex Neil's job, of course not. But what is that role? Is there any conversations around it? I'll give you an example. You know, we all can see and tell that we've got so many bloody injuries all the time. And as fans, we want to know, well, why? We seem to have more injuries than others. I'm using that as one example, right? So forgive me if that's not where we want to go with this conversation. But yeah, I guess maybe question for you, Stu, you know, what role do you think you can play in bridging some of those gaps?
Yeah, great question. So we had exactly that conversation on injuries in the meeting. And again, it's challenging the club with that as a supporter, I think we believe we've got lots of injuries. Actually, Mark did a great job and not breaking confidentiality, came with data to show us actually our percentages to clubs around us. So I think again, it's one of those in a formal setting, challenging the headline level. I think it was interesting because the wider question came part of the interview process that we all went through, and one of the questions that Ashley that sort of sits across the country's advisory FAB boards asked us that exact question. And I think it's a tough one, right? Because what we don't want to do is meddle in the club. In a nice way, Mark and the team have got a hell of a lot to do, and there needs to be a balance. But we talked about sort of transfers, and I think sometimes as supporters we get quite emotional about a player leaving and the why. And I think we can play a part to sort of bridge that gap of that this is a business, and ultimately we come back to numbers. We'd all love to see a number of the players that have gone stay, but it's a business and we need to balance the book. So for me, I don't think we should be meddling, but if there are key messages that we can challenge in a closed forum, Mark II, so hold them accountable, but filter that information out, we should. I think that's going to be a suck it and see, right? It's going to be a let's see how we go, find our feet. I don't think there's a right answer now, but it's going to be a balance in short.
And I think linked to that as well, we use the advisory board to talk a little bit about the regulatory regime that we work under. And it's one that we start talking about profit and sustainability, about salary cap cost management. Fans' eyes glaze over, because mine do. You sit in a meeting with the EFL and it can be thoroughly mind-numbingly boring at times when we talk about nuances of various different rules. However, these are rules that are in place across all clubs. These are rules that do constrain what we could do. We can't go out and just spend whatever we like. We have to work within certain parameters. But what we probably aren't good enough at talking through is the reasons why we're at this level. When we talk about the amounts that we can offer to players, it's at this level because, in effect, we've got a pot to work with and we've got to fill that squad with the right type of players, which means you can't go above that because the rules won't allow. And actually, at the moment, we're in a state of flux in football. Obviously, with the regulator coming in, with new rules being discussed, we're on a trial year this year with a new set of VFL rules, whilst we're under old rules. We need to make sure we're compliant on wherever it's going, but those rules haven't been voted for yet. And as one of the 24 clubs, all the turkeys will vote for Christmas. So there'll be lobbying from those with money, those without money, those with a different viewpoint. And we know that we're in a group of probably 7 or 8 clubs who have a very similar moral compass to us, but we might not get what we want. It may be that somebody else lobbies and does a better job from their ownership group's perspective as it stands that day. So it's a really difficult one because they're the things that behind the scenes we can't really put out. We don't want to say our wage bill is X and we're spending Y on this player and Z on this player. I mean, I see on social media some of the numbers that get reported, and I mean, I mean, J.K. Rowling has obviously written some of these things because some of the numbers you read, you just go, I don't know where this has come from. Sometimes they're bang on the money because people know, and unfortunately, that's the world we're in. But it's talking through and going, we have constraints that we have to work with, as every organisation does. But ours are very different because they're not necessarily geared to, we must hit a profit of X. I mean, that would be lovely if we were at that point, but actually, we've got to make sure our loss isn't above Y. We've got to make sure our salary cost is Z against turnover, all these different measures that are in place. Some of them aren't even in rules yet. So it's actually trying to preempt it, because if a rule comes in for next season and we're in the championship, we need to make sure we're compliant. And what we don't want is a challenger then going, we've got to change our model slightly because the rules are no longer going to allow us to do that. So that's one of the areas where we will be talking about decision making with the fan advisory board, but very much on the basis of this is why we're doing it. And hopefully people will understand the rationale, even if they don't always agree with the reason, the outcome, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I was just looking at the idea of a fans forums. I mean, everything that you've been talking about there, Mark, comes down to what we started with in a sense, which is the communication side. I think if people have an understanding of where the club sits in the championship tapestry and what the rules and limits are, to whatever level you can disclose some of it, hopefully most might have a more moderate opinion rather than going on X and talking crap basically. But you're always going to get some level of crap, aren't you? But I just think the communication is a key for this board, this fan advisory board. If you get that right, it'll go a long way, I think.
Nick, as well, I think it's also trust is a key word, because Mark was very open with us in the room and went through numbers that quite rightly should stay in that room. But I think we do really, as a fan advisory, want to build the trust. We had a very robust conversation about numbers, and that was back and forth. And I walked out the room feeling a lot more comfortable than I walked in as a supporter. And I think us gaining the trust of supporters to know that we are holding Mark and the team accountable in that room, I think is super important. And again, as I said at the start, actually some of that we just can't communicate outwards, and that's where the trust part is really, really important to making this work.
Yeah, absolutely, Stu. Yeah, I agree.
Can I end with one question from my side? I know at the start we talked about this sort of mission statement and it was a bit too corporate or whatever, but I would love to hear what the actual 3-5 year strategy is, right? What is the strategy? And appreciate some of that may need to be kept confidential, but we should almost have like a customer facing or a supporter facing, shouldn't have used the word customer, supporter. I'm in my work mode. I've got to go back to a meeting in a minute. In a supporter mode mentality, like what is the strategy, and how does the FAB kind of help support in that?
Well, I'll kick off with, from a club perspective, our kind of look, without using word for word, and again, we evolved this quite a bit and we spend a lot of time internally looking at this, but our mission is we need to compete at the highest level of football at the most sustainable way. So again, it's looking at doing it our way, doing it the right way. So, but our aim, it's very clear. We know where our aim is. That links to our, obviously, 5-year plan, our KPIs. And again, as we go through, these would be areas that we talk through with the fan advisory board to say, these are our kind of strategic focuses for now and for the next 5 years. The KPIs we've got sort of 13, 14 of them. They are fan, they are performance, they are financial, and they're operational. So kind of over key areas, but they are very much, we put them in place last year. We're in year 2 of them, but we will look at how they evolve over a rolling 5-year period. Fully aware that there may be changes in league during that time, so that may mean rebasing. But for us, it's very clear that we need to do certain things. We talk about kind of 3 pillars of our success: financial and operational, doing things more efficiently than others, which we do, but we've got to keep going there, keep looking at ways to drive incremental revenue, look at ways to use the den 365 days a year, all those things. That's on me. That's why I was asked to come back and why my part of the deal there. Then looking at a more self-sustainable reinvestment model on the pitch to we're seeing that. We're seeing that with obviously the sales we've made. We've reinvested that. We've never, and we did talk, and when the financials come out, you'll see we've never spent as much money on our playing squad and obviously building that up. But then that will unlock future value, which then can be reinvested, and it should be self-fulfilling. And then the third part is obviously the real estate part and the property development and that income stream that our competitors won't have, which then starts to give us a sustained competitive advantage against other non-parachute clubs, which again helps supplement point 1, point 2.
Yeah, I think from our side, when I was talking about a mission statement, I was talking very specifically about the FAB, but actually sitting here reflecting at the end of the call, I'm actually thinking the feedback is that probably could be useful. And the word mission statement might be corporate, but putting out on the website, the FAB page of the website, that actually this is what we are about, could actually be really helpful. So I think you started with questions of how we're different from the MSC. Well, we could just put a few words around that and start to publish it. So yeah, let me take it away. So we've had our first meeting. We're finding our feet, but let me have a chat with the rest of the team. I think it's good feedback and certainly something I'm sitting here pondering. We thought it was too corporate, but what I'm hearing is I think that would be helpful. And then I think the other element to this is you mentioned communication. That we have, as a group, do we have a social media page or not? Because if we do, actually, are we just opening ourselves up to being the same as the MSC? So I think this is one of the things I'd love to work through with Steve, you guys, just to sort of look, where is the balance? Where is the right point that we together, coming back to my point of unions and teams and HR teams, all have got a function, all add value. So let's just find the right place for the FAB over the next few months.
Great. Well,
fantastic.
I really enjoyed that, and I know I think the fans and listeners will, because yeah, Nick obviously jested at the start. There's only 2 of us here, and you weren't quite as interesting as Femi Aziz. Well, I found that very interesting. So thank you very much for your time.
Me too. Nice to meet you, Stu, and good to see you again, Mark, and you, Chris.
Yeah, likewise.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks,
Have a good one. Thanks very much.
Bye.